one of our haters who are out there watching.
I want to warn people about hypnoporn.
We need to stay meta.
Stop that.
Need new tires? Like, what?
If Jim would shut up for a second.
Oh, high fidelity.
Okay, don't tell me to shut up.
I'm not whining.
I eat doggies. I eat doggies. Feels like a party.
Stop that.
It's a war. They have made it so that I cannot be celebrating July 4th.
I don't care. I'm gonna lie, I'm not gonna pretend. I don't care. How do I think? That's what I think. I don't.
We're going to have to be smart. We're going to have to be strategic. We're going to have to be aggressive.
I'm an alpha guy.
I'll flip a table every time you aren't getting by.
Let's go. Just push.
It's all psychological warfare.
I'm not part of QAnon.
We know what they are doing.
For Trump.
If shit goes wrong, like, I will literally have to leave the country. Stop that. I'll land my initial plane.
Okay, high five. This isn't the hi-fi show.
Good night. Nighty-night.
This is 6 Degrees of Stew. You don't need to stay meta, but I'm glad you're here.
1995 and the Reverend Jerry Falwell. On January 28, 1995, a beaming Reverend Jerry Falwell told his old-time gospel hour congregation news that seemed heaven sent. The televangelist hailed two Virginia businessmen as financial saviors of debt-ridden Liberty University, the fundamentalist Christian school that Falwell had made the crown jewel of his religious right empire. Quote, "They had to borrow money, hawk their houses, hawk everything," enthused Falwell. "Thank God for friends like Dan Reber and Jimmy Thomas." Falwell's congregation rose as one to applaud. The star of the moment was Daniel Reber, who was standing behind Falwell. Left unmentioned in the happy sermon was the identity of the biggest guardian angel who had been protecting Falwell's financial interest. From a distance and without publicity, the secret benefactor was Sun Moon. Covertly, Moon helped bail out Liberty University through one of his front groups, which funneled $3.5 million. Yes, $3.5 million to the Reber Thomas Christian Heritage Foundation, the nonprofit that had purchased the school's debt. In a lawsuit on file in the Circuit Court of Bedford County, a community in southwestern Virginia, two of Reber's former business associates alleged that Reber and Falwell flew to South Korea on January 9, 1994, on a 7-day secret trip to meet with representatives of the Unification Church. The court document states that Reber and Falwell were accompanied to South Korea by Ronald S. Goodwin, who had been executive director of Falwell's Moral Majority before signing on as vice president of Moon's Washington Times. According to Bedford County records, Reber, Falwell, and Goodwin also had discussions at Liberty University in 1993 with Dong Moon Ju. Though Weber was questioned about the purposes of the Moon-connected meetings in court papers, he settled the business dispute before responding to questions or submitting to a deposition. He did deny any legal wrongdoing. Falwell, who once boasted that he had spurned a $1 million speaking fee from Moon in the mid-1980s, now found himself caught in Moon's orbit. On July 26, 1994, Falwell prominently sat at the head table for Moon's inauguration of yet another front group, the Youth Federation for World Peace. Falwell posed for a group of photos with Moon and other dignitaries. Next to Falwell stood Ronald Reagan's daughter, Maureen. Quote, "If the American Atheist Society or Saddam Hussein himself ever sent an unrestricted gift to any of my ministries," Falwell says, "be assured, I will operate on Billy Sunday's philosophy. The devil's had it long enough," and quickly cash the check. Now we're going to move into a controversy that happened within the Vatican and one of its cardinals. This happened in 2001. Archbishop Emmanuel Malingo married a woman chosen for him by Moon. He later then retracted it on television, saying he loved his wife as a sister and was returning to the Catholic Church. He was threatened with excommunication, but the church was already unhappy with him because of his colorful healing ceremonies and exorcisms. He said that the sense of isolation and frustration caused by official Vatican suspicion of his unorthodox religious practices threw him into Moon and his wife Maria Sung's suffocating embrace. He had not found the charity and maternal affection that he expected from the Catholic Church. He had agreed to marry a woman of Moon's choice, not out of a desire to challenge the Vatican's teaching on priestly celibacy, but simply because it was a condition set by the Moonies for him to be allowed to preach the gospel message to them. Quote, I may have been subjected to a kind of brainwashing, he said in his book-length interview with the Italian journalist Michele Zanzucci. He explained that the Moonies were planning to establish a schismatic Catholic Church in Africa to be led by the charismatic Zambian rebel and to include other married priests and bishops. A document outlining the project mysteriously disappeared from his suitcase on his return to Italy, he said. Some years later, the Roman Catholic Archbishop Malingo, who was flanked by a group of international clergy, announced that he was inaugurating a movement to reconcile the Catholic Church with approximately 150,000 ordained priests around the world who have married. He called the new association Married Priests Now, and he was calling on priests who are currently married and all national and international married priest organizations to appeal to the Roman Catholic Church to reconcile married priests to active service. The African Archbishop Malingo, along with the 4 men he supposedly ordained as bishop, did incur excommunication according to the directives of canon law. Malingo did go back to his wife that he married under his son Moon, and so that was another issue that was going on with this as well. The Vatican's communication says, for this public act, both Archbishop Malingo and the 4 ordinands have incurred excommunication, as laid down in Canon 1382 of the Code of Canon Law. The 4 men have joined Malingo's Married Priests Now organization, which announced its intent to change Catholic rules on celibacy by refusing to obey the Church's teaching on hierarchy. The Vatican said Malingo also violated church law when he established his new organization, Married Priests Now, and when he celebrated Mass with married clergy. He introduced Married Priests Now in Washington, D.C., where he was currently residing with his wife at the time. And I'm trying to go chronologically here. There are some little tidbits that come up that are kind of interesting as I go along with these controversies or things that people probably should have noticed, especially conservative Republicans that were reading the Washington Times around these periods, because it was very popular, and we're now into 2000. So in 2003, in the Washington Times, they ran a double-page spread that claimed all 36 deceased American presidents had acknowledged Moon's preeminence. Thomas Jefferson, meanwhile, had penned a personal endorsement from beyond the grave. Quote, follow the teachings of Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the Messiah to all people. Yes, Thomas Jefferson penned a personal endorsement from beyond the grave, and all 36 deceased American presidents had acknowledged Moon's preeminence. This was a 2-page double spread in the Washington Times in 2003. So we have conservative Republicans, or just conservatives in general. I shouldn't say just Republicans, but conservatives who read the Washington Times. They were the majority of their subscribers and readers who read this and saw this and are just like, okay, good paper, checks out. It's kind of our the equivalent of Epoch Times, and that's what the Washington Times is. So when I found that, I thought I would share that because that's pretty interesting on its face that was in there in the early 2000s. And a surprising, or maybe non-surprising turn of events, Hunter Biden and the Biden family comes in the year of 2008. And it deals with some Moon family members and a company called Paradigm. At this time, James Park was feeling like he had lost his family and everything that gave him meaning. He started binging on cocaine, and Paradigm, his company, suffered. According to people with inside knowledge, one of Park's business partners began angling for control of the company, and Park began hunting for a buyer friendly to his interest. As luck would have it, he found one in an unlikely quarter, then Senator Joseph Biden's family. At the time, Biden was mulling a 2008 presidential bid. According to sworn statements from people involved in the deal, he worried that his son Hunter's lobbying career could hurt his campaign and asked his brother James to find Hunter a new line of work. Hunter Biden disputes this account in an interview with the New Republic. James Biden approached a business associate named Anthony Lotito, who connected him with James Park's camp, and the three men began negotiating to buy Paradigm. The Bidens soon realized that Paradigm wasn't as solid as they thought. Instead of the $1.5 billion under management, it had just $200 to $300 million, and its holding companies were buried in debt. Worse, the Bidens' main financer backed out. But the Bidens found a way around the lack of capital. That summer, according to court documents and people close to both sides of the negotiations, they approached Park, who was still in treatment, and cut a new deal. Instead of the $21 million in cash, they would fork over an $8 million note. Hunter Biden and his lawyer, Mark Lopresti, maintained that the deal was fair, given the state of the company, but people close to Park say that he was emotionally fragile and felt indebted to the Bidens, which put him in a vulnerable position. In the spring of 2006, they signed an agreement that gave them a controlling stake in the company in return for $21 million in cash to be paid in 6 months. Hunter Biden, who had no financial industry experience, was named CEO with a salary of $1.2 million. But it was clear that they needed James Park's hedge fund expertise, which meant confronting him about his cocaine habit. According to 3 sources close to the negotiations, James Biden visited James Park and persuaded him to seek treatment at a center in Florida. Finally, in 2008, the economy collapsed, after which it emerged that Alan Stanford, whose firm was soliciting investors for one of Paradigm's funds, was running a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme. While the fund itself was solid, investors were spooked. In 2010, Paradigm filed for voluntary liquidation. It was a thicket, Hunter Biden said. Every time you thought you saw a way out, there would be another roadblock. James Park was never able to collect on the $8 million note, and he found himself facing a mountain of debt. Now we're up to more current times. And this involves former President Donald Trump. In 2023, he received some $2.5 million from the Universal Peace Federation, a Unification Church affiliated group, to make video appearances on 3 occasions. 3 occasions, $2.5 million between 2021 and 2022, while former Vice President Mike Pence was paid $550,000 for speaking at a UPF event. The UPF has maintained that the group didn't pay Shinzo Abe, who made a video appearance at its event in September of 2021. Abe did say in the video that he appeared in that he highly appreciated the Unification Church, formerly called the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, for its efforts to place importance on the value of family. The video appearance is believed to have been one of the triggers for his assassination in July of 2022. We're staying in 2023, and we're going to talk about land that Moon bought in Paraguay and helped him become the largest private landowner there. We're going to begin with the morning of July in 2022. 30 Paraguayan anti-narcotics officers flew into the woodland wilderness known as Chaco to raid 5 airplane landing strips used by drug traffickers. It is situated in northern Paraguay. It's a small landlocked South American nation. The isolated Chaco has in recent years become a key transshipment point for trafficking cocaine to European markets. Moon, who founded the Unification Church, became one of Paraguay's, as I mentioned, largest private landowners. He bought the Chaco plot roughly 25 years ago as part of his religious and commercial expansion into Latin America, which he wanted to make roads into Latin America and Africa. Two senior Paraguayan anti-narcotics officers provided Reuters, and this is where I was reading this article from, with 11 coordinators of Chaco landing strips allegedly used by drug gangs. By plotting these points on a map of the moon holding provided by a church source, Reuters identified at least 5 different airstrips on the property, including the 4 involved in the July raid. Authorities found no drugs on the planes during the operation and made no arrest, but there were rustic shacks next to the runways with basic provisions, beds, radio equipment, things like that. A few days later, a team with construction equipment and explosives arrived to destroy the runways and make sure they were inoperable. Reuters, the reporters there, found no evidence that the Unification Church or its members were involved in the drug runnings targeted by the raids, or that it controls the airstrips in Chaco. A lawyer that represents the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity as the church's Paraguayan branch said in the statement that the church is aware of the illegal activity on its land and is cooperating with law enforcement. The Unification Church is a major power in this region. Moon, its founder, first visited Chaco in the 1990s to fish the Paraguay River, which fishing and waterways are very important to Moon. We will discuss that when we talk about sushi in America coming up. He bought the plot from the Argentine agricultural conglomerate, paying $22 million for an area roughly 10 times the size of Manhattan. Moon describes himself as part of a global environmental movement to preserve the living creatures of the Chaco in the pristine state in which God created them. He said he had hoped to transform the long-neglected land into an earthly paradise and a base for his supporters. Residents of a small town inside the holding have fiercely contested the church's ownership. After Moon's death in 2012, his relatives split the church into 3 rival sects, 2 of which are waging a long-running legal battle over who owns the Chaco plot. More recently, drug traffickers have muscled in on the territory. One prominent Paraguayan with close ties to the church has been convicted of a drug-related crime. Cynthia Tarago, a member of the Paraguayan Congress between 2013 and 2018, and regional president of a church offshoot organization. In Paraguay, where the Chaco acquisition has long been contentious, the church has cultivated close ties with presidents, politicians, and Supreme Court justices. Some have been granted senior positions in the church or many offshoot organizations. Tarago was one of them. In 2017, she was named president of the South American chapter of the International Association of Paramilitarians for Peace. Bayan, the church lawyer, was named Secretary General. Launched in 2016, the IAPP recruits legislators from around the world who are committed to advancing church goals. In 2020, Tarago and her husband pled guilty to money laundering charges after being caught up in a sting operation by the U.S. FBI. FBI agents impersonating drug traffickers provided the money that Tarago laundered. Before her conviction, Tarago, a former TV personality, had been a rising star in the right-wing Colorado Party that had ruled Paraguay for all of but 5 of the past 75 years. She spoke openly of her ambition to be the nation's first female president and had just announced her candidacy for mayor, the capital, when she was arrested on U.S. soil in late 2019. Tarago had been appearing at important church events in Paraguay by 2016. The following year, she spoke at a global summit in Seoul, according to church promotional materials. In November of 2018, she flew into New York City with her husband for another such event at the Unification Church-owned New Yorker Hotel. Yes, they own the New Yorker Hotel as well. During their stay, the couple met an undercover FBI agent who asked them to launder drug money. They said they were game. They also told the agent, quote, how inexpensive cocaine and marijuana are in Paraguay. And they said they had a network that could import drugs into the United States. By the time they were arrested on another U.S. trip a year later, the couple had laundered $800,000 of FBI cash with the help of a Paraguayan accomplice, who processed the funds through his money transfer business. Tarago and her husband were sentenced last year to 33 months in a U.S. prison. Tarago, who had been in prison since her November 2019 arrest, was credited for time served and and released in April of 2022. Beyond and Tarago's role as the IAPP's South American president was only an honorary position. The church stripped her of a title after the arrest, according to Beyond and the church documents. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how this has affected the community and how Moon actually got this property and who he purchased it from. In 2000, after snapping up assets in Uruguay and Brazil, Moon purchased the Chaco terrain from Carlos Casado, S.A., an agricultural giant named after its founder, a 19th century Spanish-Argentinian magnate. The acquisition handed the church full control of Puerto Casado, a small company town built to house Carlos Casado employees who for decades had toiled in semi-feudal conditions, processing tannin from Chaco's native quebracho trees. Overnight, everything in Puerto Casado, its houses, roads, and cemetery, all belonged to Moon and his church. Anger quickly mounted as the town's 6,000-odd inhabitants realized the homes they had lived in their entire lives, but never owned, now belonged to a self-proclaimed messiah from Korea. When church executives flew in to close the deal, locals formed a human chain to block the plane from leaving, forcing them to sleep the night in the aircraft. Early church gestures to assuage tensions, such as an offer to hand back control of the cemetery to the town's inhabitants, only caused greater outrage. Its administration also stoked resentment. Locals recalled one church official, Lorenzo Myung, who would walk around the town armed with a shotgun. His son, known as Lorenzito, quote, was even worse because he was more aggressive, menacing locals if they looked him in the eyes, said Martin Rodriguez, an 87-year-old Spanish priest. Rodriguez and other locals accused the Myungs of involvement in a 2005 blaze that burned down the local radio station, housed in the town's Catholic church, which served as the main mouthpiece of opposition to the Korean ownership. Doris, a prosecutor who led the probe into the blaze, said the townspeople and church management were at war when she arrived in Puerto Casado. She said Lorenzo Myung, whom she recalled as an aggressive man, accused locals of stealing church property, but provided no evidence. Locals, meanwhile, accused Irizabal of being a church stooge after she flew in on a church plane. Quote, "It was a tense moment," she said. Irizabal said an investigation found signs of arson, but did not have sufficient evidence to charge anyone. The case remains unsolved. Beyond, the church lawyer acknowledged the tensions with locals in Puerto Casado. The schisms have affected operations in Paraguay, where the branch led by Preston Moon has been embroiled in a complex legal battle to wrest full control of the Chaco plot from the church's Paraguayan chapter affiliated with his mother. Currently, both branches own separate portions of the property. Sean Moon said in a statement that his father meant for him to inherit his entire foundation, including the Chaco property. He said he was unaware of the drug running there. The lawyer for the church in Paraguay has said that the church has been unfairly demonized by local media, but she said it is undeniable that the family feud has had a negative impact on Moon's futuristic vision for the Chaco. Quote, "Unfortunately, the internal family crisis between the true parents and one of the sons, namely Preston, projected a bad image of the church that has not been able to improve." While the Moons tussle for control of the Chaco property, drug traffickers increasingly encroach on the territory. And we're going to go back a little bit. Looking back to 3 weeks before the 2020 presidential election, former White House senior counselor Steve Bannon addressed a crowd gathered on the grounds of Carr Arms Tommy Gun Warehouse in Greeley, PA, by video. He warned about a supposed Democratic conspiracy to steal the elections from Donald Trump. Quote, "What the left intends to do, and you're seeing it in Pennsylvania right now, use the courts, use social media, use mainstream media to try to make sure Trump is not declared the winner that night," Bannon said. He promised that Trump forces would win this thing, adding, "Pennsylvania is the key that picks the lock for a second Trump term." That is one of the businesses owned by one of Moon's sons that broke off from the main church after Moon died. Following the 2020 elections, Rod of Iron Ministries deployed its American members to a string of large rallies in Washington, D.C., Harrisburg, PA, and Valdosta, Georgia, in November and December that helped build momentum for the January 6th insurrection. Church members were also enlisted from Japan and South Korea that fanned out across Pennsylvania for almost daily roadside rallies in support of Trump. As leader of Rod of Iron Ministries, Sean Moon promoted the big lie that the election was stolen from Trump while issuing apocalyptic warnings to his followers to prepare for violent confrontation as President Joe Biden's inauguration approached. On the eve of the January 6th rally, Sean Moon posted a stylized video on Instagram entitled Rod of Iron Riders Scout DC that showed him leading the pack in a camouflage skull mask, replete with an ominous soundtrack. He followed with a post promoting the March to Save America that declared, quote, Trump wants to see you in DC. The graphic included 3 panels instructing supporters to come to Freedom Plaza on January 5th at 1 p.m., at 9 a.m. on January 6th, and finally to the Capitol building at 1 p.m. My coverage of Sean, the Rod of Iron Ministries, and Associates will begin on the west side lawn of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th of 2021. Sean Moon can be seen here on the West Lawn chanting Decertify on January 6th, the attack on the U.S. Capitol. He is pumping his fist. He is wearing the black beanie with a black coat, a red shirt underneath, gloves, tan pants, and tan boots.
Decertify! 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 Decertify!
By the end of this clip, Sean Moon has removed his black beanie but is wearing the same clothes. He has a shaved head. On January 6th, a video shared on Instagram by Sean Moon shows him and at least a dozen Rod of Iron Ministry members reacting to chemical spray from law enforcement officers on the plaza outside the Capitol.
They pepper spray the folks. Everybody got tear gas. Stand with President Trump and keep up the fight. God bless God's be King come. And we are on God's side. And the freedom of people's world are on God's side. So yes, there will be a period of great tribulation, but there will be resistance against it.
Moon later led members onto the scaffolding on the west side of the building. One Rod of Iron Ministries associate, Robert Pickle, pushed against a line of Capitol police officers in riot gear outside of the Columbus doors as other rioters pelted the officers with projectiles and bashed out windows with flagpoles.
They're gonna push out this way. Get on the side.
In a fiery sermon shared on his Instagram 2 days after the Capitol siege, he called January 6th, quote, an epic day, when American patriots, quote, made a spiritual stance against evil. Moon whitewashed the assault on the Capitol as, quote, a peaceful protest. What does peace police, peace militia mean that Father talks about? It is really about each of us becoming responsible to our neighbor and to our country, to really become patriots in the truest way. And then based on this foundation, the Cheon-il-guk Constitution can be launched and accepted. The Constitution of the United States of Cheon-il-guk, authored by Sun Moon, is described on the sect website as providing the political framework for the future kingdom of God on earth. Shortly after the January 6th insurrection, Sean Moon informed his followers that part of this growth plan was to go to Texas. The church purchased a 40-acre compound and marina on a lake an hour east of Waco, Texas. The property was listed at just under $100 million. The sect held a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the campground, rechristened it Liberty Rock on April 20th. In the next part, we will talk about how the organization has been legitimized through events that they've held, the propping up by political leaders, famous people, although they may not have realized the organizations that they were speaking at and the ties, because the Unification Church has so many offshoots, and political leaders who still spoke for speaking fees even though they did know. So the literature and research that I've come across has stated that in the early days, Moon had little influence over the West before 1972. During that, he spoke at a number of meetings, answering questions from members and guests at centers throughout the United States. The transcriptions of these sessions were to form the first in a series of documents, which were later internally titled The Master Speaks. While in Washington, he sought out various political figures in order to introduce them to his movement and ask for their support. The most famous of these figures was the former President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The accomplishment that the members were to consider one of the most significant of this world tour was, however, the establishment of 120 grounds. 55 of them were in the United States of America. Moon's next world tour was in 1969. The highlight of this visit that were to provide European national leaders during the 1970s. A further 22 couples were blessed in Japan the following month. A third world tour began in late 1971. At the end of the tour, Moon returned to America, the country where he remained for the rest of his life. Although during earlier visits, he had obviously instigated certain changes and provided a focus on enthusiasm for members, it is clear that his settling in the United States ushered in a new era for the Unification Church. The Third World Tour was the mark of the beginning of 3 years of all-out evangelism by the movement in America, and a new phase in Moon's ministry. He had not spoken publicly in the West before, but for the next 5 years, he was to be seen and heard by hundreds of thousands of people in cities throughout Europe and North America, and publicly he wanted Moon to turn into a household name. In 1976, to improve their image, Moon's church hired Burson Marsteller, the same PR firm who had done work for Exxon and General Motors. This relationship ended because the firm began to worry about how it might affect their image. In 1976, Moon had had his picture taken and used in church publications with senators such as Hubert Humphrey, Edward Kennedy, Strom Thurmond, and James Buckley. And Moon was very good at this, to get his pictures taken with public figures such as this, and then they put it out in church publications. And his pictures with President Eisenhower, they used it, and the way they write about it, they're good at the propaganda piece of it. And a lot of their legitimacy has come from that. In 1976, with the support from Representative Richard Eachord, former chairman of the Internal Security Committee, Moon presented a speech on God's plan for America in the House caucus room. Yes, he was allowed to present a speech on God's plan for America in the House caucus room. In 1981, Moon occupied a seat of honor at Ronald Reagan's inauguration. The administration officials say they don't know how that happened. They also went on a goodwill tour, and in 1985, for 4 months, 300,000 ministers received a box in the mail bearing 3 words: a gift for you from some folks who care. Inside there were pamphlets, 2 books, and 6 hours of doctrinal lectures and video cassettes. The 5-pound gift packs were part of their extravagant PR efforts by Moon's group to try to be goodwill and get their message out. The propaganda program was taking place while Moon was serving his 18-month prison term in Danbury, Connecticut. It was a federal prison for his income tax fraud, and he was due for release on August 20th. So they were kind of doing a goodwill kind of, look at Moon, he's in prison, but this is really what it's all about. While he was in prison, Shaw Divinity School in Raleigh, North Carolina, awarded an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree to Moon. The school cited Moon for his humanitarian contributions in several areas: social justice efforts to relieve human suffering, religious freedom, and the fight against world communism. Another example of this goodwill campaign while Moon was in prison, 7,000 clergy had been courted for all expense-paid unification seminars in the Caribbean, Europe, and Asia, as well as U.S. sites. Moon-related scientific conferences have also tried to win prestige by signing up Nobel scholars, while a unification-backed anti-communist agency seeks allies among fundamentalists. Capitalizing on its ownership of the Daily Washington Times and New York Tribune, the Moon movement has run junkets for hundreds of journalists to soften media hostility. We talked about this a little bit previously, how in the 90s things started to shift for him because Democrats came into power. We have Bill Clinton, so he had to begin courting new groups, such as socially conservative black churches and Democratic politicians. So the church also launched the Women's Federation for World Peace, which packaged its theology as a tool for liberation as women, which liberation in this case meant reviving traditional families by being unusually obedient. Mrs. Moon, whose role in the church had been ceremonial up until this point, was named president of the Women's Federation for World Peace. She began traveling the world, proclaiming herself as co-messiah and urging women to devote themselves to their families. Quote, "We must spread to the world a model movement in which we embrace our husbands and raise our children properly," she told a crowd in Seoul. On several occasions, former President George H.W. Bush, a major beneficiary of Moon family donations, appeared alongside her, as did his wife Barbara. In a major departure, Moon formally declared Mrs. Moon to be his equal and promised she would inherit everything from father. In 1995, Bush and his wife Barbara were scheduled to speak at 6 events in 7 days, from September 13th to the 19th, in a tour sponsored by the Women's Federation for World Peace, whose founder and head was Moon's wife, Hak Ja Han Moon. The Bushes shared the stage with her at events from Sapporo in the far north to Fukuro in the south, including a global family festival rally at Tokyo Dome Stadium that organizers hoped would draw 50,000 people. Jean Becker, a spokesman who traveled with Bush in Vietnam, where he had begun a 3-country Asian speaking tour that also included China, said that Bush was unaware of any connection between the Federation and the Unification Church. Becker said Bush had spoken at the Women's Federation for Peace events 3 or 4 times in Washington. She said he had been impressed by the quality of the other prominent Americans who had also spoken to the group, including Coretta Scott King, television news personality Barbara Walters. Marilyn Quayle, wife of Bush's vice president Dan Quayle, was listed as a speaker on the program of the Federation's 1993 festival at the Tokyo Dome. Quote, "We were satisfied that there was no connection with the Unification Church, and based on the information we were given, we felt comfortable speaking to this group," Becker said. She said that she was not aware of Bush's views on the Unification Church. In 1995 as well, Moon had strengthened his alliances with several conservative religious figures, including Jerry Falwell, which we already talked about. He saved Liberty University from bankruptcy at an organization that was founded by Moon when he turned over $3.5 million to it in 1995. In 1996, Moon's energy and money was being channeled into the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. Inaugurated by Moon and his wife in 1996, it promoted family values and faith in God. The business cards that were being handed out by church leaders usually bear the name and logo of the Family Federation. They were very good at hiding any links to the Unification Church in very discreet ways, but you could find it if you had the will to look. On November 29th, 1997, Sun Myung Moon presided over a mass wedding at Robert F. Kennedy Stadium in Washington, D.C. It was a far cry from a similar event in Madison Square Garden in 1982. For this latest gathering, the Unification Church had to beat the bushes to fill the stadium. Most of the 28,000 couples who attended were already married and members of other religions. Many had accepted free tickets passed out at suburban shopping malls, in supermarket parking lots to attend what the Unification Church billed as a world culture and sports festival. The lure was not Sun Moon, the Messiah. It was Whitney Houston, the pop singer. She had been offered $1 million to sing for 45 minutes. Unfortunately for those who came to hear her, after Houston learned just days before the event of Sun Moon's sponsorship, she canceled, citing sudden illness. So again, they're very clever. People were excited. They thought they were going to see Whitney Houston. It was labeled as a different event. A lot of people came, and there was no Whitney Houston. And now we're going to talk about the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut again, and it relates to New Hope. New Hope is situated outside of the town of Jardim in the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso do Sul. Students and researchers at New Hope will be linked via satellites to classrooms across the globe, but particularly to the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, which a church-linked organization took effective control of in 1992. And we talked about this before, but just as a refresher, in exchange for a loan of $60 million, much to the dismay of some members of the university community who felt that their impoverished campus had been taken over by a cult. One of the aims of New Hope, according to a former pastor, is to focus on ways to encourage environmentally responsible development in the third world. Moon frequently has cited the significance of the number 33, the age Jesus was when he was crucified. Sadusky points out that there were 33 signers of the Korean Declaration of Independence in 1919. There were 33 immortals who led the fight for the Uruguayan independence, and there are 33 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Hence the 33 communities planned for the area centered on New Hope. The project's website states, quote, each city should be one type of tree, one kind of fish, one kind of bird or animal, one kind of fruit, foodstuff, or flower to produce in massive concentrated way with cooperation from surrounding farmers in order to make possible prosperity and development in the area. The region around New Hope is supposed to become a micro-world in which the culture of every member of the United Nations will be displayed in their own areas. Or as the website puts it, micro-Germany, micro-Hungary, micro-Italy, etc. By February 2013, all humanity will join hands under the banner of Global Nation of Cosmic Peace and Unity called Cheon Il-guk. Moon and his followers began preparations in Korea, launching a police force, commissioning an anthem, and adopting a flag. They also built Moon an elaborate castle, shaped like the U.S. Capitol building. Now we're to, I think, what is one of my favorite stories of the Moon organization and legitimizing themselves. This took place in, I still can't believe this happened, in 2004. Moon was able to don a crown in the Senate office building, the Dirksen building, and to declare himself the Messiah while members of Congress watched on. Representative Danny K. Davis, a Democrat from Illinois, wore white gloves and carried a pillow holding one of the two ornate gold crowns that were placed on the head of Moon and his wife. There was a reception as well, and they billed it as a Peace Awards banquet. And some of these quotes are quite amazing, too. Quote, I remember the king and queen thing, said Representative Roscoe G. Bartlett, Republican of Maryland, but we have the king and queen of the prom, of the 4-H, Mardi Gras, and all sorts of things. I had no idea what he was king of. Senator Mark Dayton, Democrat of Minnesota, insisted they were duped and he had no idea that the organization holding the reception was connected to Moon. Senator Dayton left before the crowning. Representative Elijah E. Cummings of Maryland attended, but said he did not stay for the crowning ceremony. Articles and things on that are kind of sketchy at best because it went underreported in the news, and I think people just wanted to distance themselves from it. It's just really, it's quite incredible. Another way they have legitimized themselves is through ballet, and it is called the Universal Ballet. And I found an article where Moon's daughter-in-law was interviewed, and they kind of talk about the Universal Ballet and some shows and things of that nature. It's from 2001. The way they write about it, there's some glowing terms, and they really don't address the Unification Church very much. These dancers are determined to find success. Classes in Universal Studios are intense, no jokes, no messing around. The men's classes even have its fair share of women who push themselves, stretching for the jumps, trying to match their male counterparts in vigor and strength. Miss Moon, an American-born ballerina, is certainly one of the most feminine of dancers, delicately pliant and ethereal, soft-spoken yet determined. She also functions as the company's general director. It's mid-afternoon, and she is already on her third change of clothes for the day. Having shed her sweat-soaked practice gear just minutes before, she is sitting in the company's large but utilitarian office filled with oversized armchairs. Here she is the company's spokeswoman. Next, she'll put on a suit to meet the parents of one of the school's new scholarship students. Later, she will get dressed to play hostess to important visitors during the performance. Finally, she'll put on a long black gown for the curtain calls, which she and Mr. Vinogradov take after each performance. Those curtain calls are a matter of respect. Throughout Korean society, mentors are honored, even revered, which may explain why these dancers so easily fit into the benign, hierarchical dictatorship that is the structure of all classical ballet companies, and why Anna Kisselgoff, reviewing the Universal's 1998 New York visit in the New York Times, praised the astounding precision and attention to stylistic detail of this corps de ballet. But as Julia Moon, an original member of the company and Reverend Moon's daughter-in-law, points out, classical ballet and Korean culture both celebrate what is the feminine in women. Quote, I think the ballet suits us because Koreans are very lyrical, she said. There's a lot of grace in the women, and the men are very masculine. That contrast makes for a good combination. Mr. Vinogradov turns gleeful as a child when displaying his just-completed stage design. Shuffling his drawings around as he progresses through the story scene by scene, it seems as if he's never been so proud of any other single accomplishment. Creative and content. Mr. Vinogradov dismisses any notoriety that the company may have received because of its ties to the Moon Church, saying his only concern is with his art, and that art, not religion, drives the company's policy and profile. Miss Moon backs him in his assertion. She is the sole dancer who belongs to the church, while the administrative staff, headed by her father, Dr. Bohai Pak, one of Reverend Moon's right-hand men, is about half and half. The Universal Ballet, which now includes most of the Russian imperial classics in its repertoire, is privately financed, with most of its budget coming from the Korean Cultural Foundation, an arm, you guessed it, of the Reverend Moon's Unification Church. Art needs money to be beautiful, Mr. Vinogradov said, with a pragmatic shrug of his shoulders. What difference if it is from Mercedes or Philip Morris? In 2002, the U.S. Department of Education's Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Other Drug Prevention announced that Neil Albert Salonen, president of the University of Bridgeport, we're there again, has been selected to serve on the president's leadership group, a body of higher education presidents and chancellors who have declared their commitment to student substance abuse prevention. Higher education officials from 31 campuses representing 22 states have joined in the effort, insinuating themselves into every aspect of life in the United States and positions of power, and they did it very well, Neil Salonen. The President's Leadership Group was originally formed by Higher Education Center in 1997 with the support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to bring national attention to alcohol other drug prevention on college and university campuses. That year, the 6-member PLG published an alcohol prevention report urging college presidents to become more active leaders on the issue on their campuses and in surrounding communities. We're going to talk just a few more prominent people that I may have left out that were paid to appear at MoonLink conferences. We did mention President George Bush after he left office. There's former President Ford, Bill Cosby, Mikhail Gorbachev, Jack Kemp, and a lot of these will say later that they had no known connection between Moon and the organizations that had invited them. Again, going back to after Moon's release from prison, after he served those 13 months, he received support from the British Prime Ministers Margaret Thatcher and Edward Heath, ex-presidents Gerald Ford, George Bush Sr., Canadian ex-premier Brian Mulroney, U.S. Senators Strom Thurmond, Jesse Helms, William Fulbright, and Orrin Hatch, Reagan's Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, the former NATO Chief General Alexander Haig, U.S. Education Secretary William Bennett, Boston University President John Silber, Christian Coalition ex-chief Ralph Reed, and the right-wing Christian leader, the Reverend Jerry Falwell, which we have mentioned. Moon really did insinuate himself into a lot of well-respected, not necessarily saying I respect them, but a lot of well-respected lives of people. You know, a lot of well-respected, looked up to political figures, religious figures, and the like. In 2021, I don't know how much people remember this, but it was the anniversary of 9/11, 20th anniversary. Besides providing commentary for a heavyweight boxing match, former President Donald Trump hailed the founders of the Unification Church in a virtual speech at a conference hosted by them, but he did not attend any 9/11 remembrance events that day.
I want to thank the Universal Peace Federation, and in particular, Dr. Hawk Jahan Moon, a tremendous person, for her incredible work on behalf of peace all over the world. Her story of escaping from North Korea at 5 years old, at the outset of the Korean War, is an amazing example of the power of faith in Almighty God. I also want to thank her late husband, Reverend Moon, for founding the Washington Times, an organization for which I have tremendous respect and admiration.
On August 12th of 2022, former CIA Director and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich addressed a Unification Church Front Universal Peace Federation event in Seoul to mark the 10th anniversary of Moon's death. Trump, meanwhile, sent a video message that described Moon as a, quote, true inspiration, and Hawk Jahan as, quote, an amazing and wonderful woman. According to financial records, Trump received around $2.5 million to make that and 2 other video appearances. And we already talked about Pence making $550,000 for speaking at an event. It is a web of political and business interests that sprawls over every continent, claiming some 2 million members, although that figure is highly disputed, and over $1 billion in assets. It owns the Washington Times newspaper, the UPI Newswire, the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan, a ballet company, and True World Foods, the single largest supplier of fresh fish to the American sushi industry.
I don't need new tires, but stay tuned for the next episode.